opportunity. Thanks. So I'm just going to run through is this thing on? Run through a set of slides. Maybe not. Well, maybe I'll work without slides. We're working on a problem that basically is defined as, it was defined by Google for us in a letter of about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, where they wrote and said, you know, you guys have a lot of great learning resources inside the federal government along with a lot of other resources. But you know what? We can't find them, and we're Google. So that certainly was a helpful pointer. We'd already been trying to address this problem, but we have not addressed the problem yet. And with learning resources, they don't just exist inside the Department of Education. And in fact, as some of you may know, the Department of Education doesn't actually produce all that many learning resources itself, although we do some funding of that. But there are staggering amounts of resources and materials that can be used for learning all across the federal government. If you just think of the sort of the big ones, Smithsonian, Library of Congress, National Archives, NASA, Department of Energy, right, the list goes on and on. But oh, hey, this is working now. I guess I have to, I'm worried I'm going to break it. There you go. So it's a jack in the box. So this is some of the sites that I mentioned. There's just a pile of them, and they can be used for many different purposes. So the Department of Energy is working on a virtual learning environment, a full 3D world with assets inside and training curriculum embedded that can be entered in by someone who wants to learn how to weatherize a house, for example, and then monitored later and checked with the actual physics models to see whether it has been weatherized correctly by an instructor. And then those two people can interact either in the virtual world or elsewhere to discuss remedies and additional learning. So that's pretty dramatically integrated structured curriculum, down to, you know, NASA has this great photo of Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, and can I use that for teaching 60s history? Can I use that for teaching physics? Can I use that for teaching algebra? You know, the possibilities are fairly open. And a digitized copy of the Constitution held by NARA, what can you do with that? Well, you know, there's a lot of things that can be taught there. And I should point out that there are just a pile of learning resources elsewhere around the internet, but they're very disparately located, hard to discover, hard to integrate. So this is a problem that Google hasn't solved in the larger space, not just in the federal space. And I think that there's some work that needs to be done in order to support both learning resources inside government and learning resources outside. This is just an obligatory slide, so you know who I am. I really do love the internet. I think it's great. And I've been working with it for a long time, and I think that it can help solve this problem. And when I say internet, of course, with honors to Chris Anderson's recent article in Wired, which had a radically overblown title, but actually a pretty thoughtful text about the web is dead. The internet is not dead, and the internet, in fact, can solve a lot of problems that the web can't solve, and that's something that we're thinking about pretty hard. So the real question for us inside government is cathedral or bazaar, right? Enterprise engineering versus the other thing. Whether it's open, closed, whatever, but are you designing and structuring and building and financing the whole thing in a big cathedral, or are you dumping a bunch of pieces together and letting different parties interoperate and fix and figure out the right solution for themselves? So build it or let it build itself. Just by asking that question, you probably know what my opinion is. So this is a rough structure of what we're talking about. So this is actually a pretty boring slide, but it's kind of important for me. So if you look at the federal learning resources at the bottom, then there's this sharing API or network. That's what we call the learning registry. And then on top of that, there are innovators, publishers, community managers, app builders, lots and lots of people who can make use of this stuff. So if we can make discoverable resources inside the federal government, we're not talking about creating a search interface, yet another portal to come and search our stuff. We're talking about a way to express this stuff out into your stuff, whether you're building a mobile phone app or an online learning repository or a whole virtual world, you know, simulator, whatever you're doing. If you need assets for that, the federal government ought to give you the ones that it has. So that's number one obligation. But I want to point out that just with regard to interoperability, that's not enough. That's not enough to make this project, I don't think, sufficiently interesting. I think it gets interesting when you look at it this way, which is anybody's learning resource going through a common API, and the federal learning resource is going through the same common API. And what would that look like? So now you can start relying on this API whether or not it's federal resources or not. And so the question is, what kind of partnership can we get to share and build resources along those lines? So my time is up, so that's the pitch for you. Thank you.